Hello again, Steve here, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about what I'm going to call the solution is pain. What a terrible name for a video or a discussion, isn't it? This has to do with how socialism, it seems to be in history, looking at socialism, the scourge of socialism, is it's a little bit like a never-ending sort of march towards more and more and more of it. And what is the possible solution to that? Which doesn't make any sense, really. It's a bit of an oxymoron in terms of a concept, isn't it? Which is that if it's an ongoing march, non-stoppable march, how is there any cure? Because that would be contrary to logic, wouldn't it? But let me just make my case here as to how I see things. Okay, so in the West, the most significant aspect of the evolution of governance, you might say, is the United States, because it was the one that really grew into a modern day republic. All the other republics, like the Latin American republics, the communist republics and so on, they're republics in name only, as far as I can see. They weren't really a republic in terms of representative government, because at the top there was always the strong man or whatever, who, like a Stalin. I mean, Stalin didn't reign over a republic. I mean, the local peasants, that's the idea of a republic, is somebody is supposed to be able to be, you're supposed to have a representative who has some sort of say or sway, right? And that wasn't the case. So what I see is the march towards socialism takes place in sort of like the old saying, 2 steps forward and 1 step back. So which equals out, of course, to a march, nevertheless, gradually towards it. And the 1 step back is always kind of it's a bit of a distraction. It looks like there's an improvement towards freedom, but it's not, because it's only because we've forgotten that there was 2 steps forward towards it, which is towards the socialism. And if we look at, the nature of human beings and the nature of the governance systems that they set up. So in the recent history, back onto the Middle Ages or so, you had like feudal kings in Europe, right? And they rule over a fiefdom, and you could say that they generally had a pretty strong, sometimes an iron fist over it. They were generally guided by morality, at least to some extent, though, because they at least claimed that they got their power to reign over the people from God, because they always had a representative of the church there. Of course, totally corruptible, because all that's made up by man and so on too, but at least there was the pretext of it. But nevertheless, human beings at a certain point didn't want that, or some didn't want that anyway. Enough didn't want that, because it's our nature. You look at a small kid, you try to bully them around, they don't really want that. Nobody wants to be just dictated to. It's better to make the case to people. So if you have a dictatorship of any kind, it's going to be problematic. So what happened in England, my understanding, is that the barons were able to wrestle control from the king, through the Magna Carta, which is to say that, no, it's not fair that just one guy has all this control. We're the ones who run all these land, tenant farms and so on. So we should have some control. So they were able to wrestle some of that control, and they created the early version of the Senate. That's what that was the barons basically having a check on the power of the king. And then from that, the lowly classes, or the tenants and stuff, they got a little bit restless, and they were considered the commoners. So they created the House of Commons. So now you had 3 levels, you might say. You had your House of Commons, you had your barons, which was like your Senate, and then you had or I guess the lords, they call it in England, and then you had your king, right? So you had that division. It was more diversified, so more people could have a say. And then, of course, but the king, or its power, when that was over in a colony, when the American colonies were there, all that House of Commons, House of Lords and so on didn't really apply to them, because they were just the colonies. They didn't like to be dictated upon, so they said, screw you, and they went off and they fought a revolutionary war and created the best republic that they could envision, which was that the highest power in the land is the individual, because the individual and the president is something who presides over, but isn't an authority, right? He has to take the dictates of the Constitution and whatever it is that the lawmakers are supposed to be the representatives who get voted in regularly by by the people, and that's the nature of the republic. But even then, when it was set up, only so many people could vote. Only you had to qualify to vote, right? So from there comes the democracy. The democracy is when you, because in the beginning, the only people who could vote for the representatives had to be men. They had to be landowners. They had to be a certain status in society, right? Not anybody. So it was limited. You can say, well, it's unfair and so on, but nevertheless, it was limited. So when you have democracy, you expand the franchise of the vote to many, many people, all classes of people, except you still don't have children voting, which is probably coming, because that's the idea of socialism. It expands the nature of voting, so there's more people that can be bought off, right? It's lots of sort of vested interests, or what do you call it, conflict of interest, who starts voting. People who are receiving other people's money get to vote on how much more money is going to be stolen from them. So this is the ongoing march. And of course, once that starts to grow, once that really starts to metastasize, it's like a drug addict who's taking more drugs. And when he takes more drugs, enough is never enough. So it's this endless spiral, right? And of course, you add that to the amoral aspect, because that was another check that even the kings had way back in the day. They at least had to go through a sort of a morality of whether something could be done. They had to ask the bishop or somebody who was, who at least supposedly ran off of a moral code. Whereas when you have democracy, it is a complete breakdown of morality, because a tenet of morality is theft. So when you get to vote to steal somebody else's money, that's the same as stealing somebody else's money, whether you're complicit in it, right? So I don't think the solution, because I've talked to people lots about this sort of thing, otherwise decent people, and it doesn't seem to get through. No amount of reason and evidence, or even morality, seems to be able to get through, because people see that morality is sort of like religion, right? Like with the Islamic or Judeo version of morality, it means it applies to our group. But we don't have to apply that morality. Like, if thou shalt not lie, a universal morality is we shouldn't lie to anybody. But the way people are is they're tribal. So it's okay to lie to certain people. It's okay that we steal that rich guy's money, but we shouldn't steal the money from the poor guy. That's not a universal morality. It doesn't make any sense, right? So what is a universal understanding that most people understand? I think it's pain. And that's what's going to turn this around. The march towards socialism is going to continue until enough people feel enough pain. And that's my prediction, my analysis of it, because it doesn't seem like enough people are concerned about their higher sense. Their higher sense of humanity is reason and evidence, and being able to reason, being able to think. And most people don't seem to care about that, because it's only circumstantial. It's when it serves them that it does. But if I'm getting somebody else's money, then I'll ignore the reason behind that or the morality behind it. And I think the march towards socialism will be halted. The other thing I mentioned too is once you get democracy, then you get this fractioning of left versus right. There's one group will say, "Oh, we stand up for your liberty, to keep what's yours." The other groups, and that tends to be the right, and the left says, "We stand up for your freedom to be able to take what others produce, all these social programs and so on." And of course they hold sway in the vast majority of people who are on the receiving end of things, especially when you expand the voting franchise to a whole raft of people who are constantly on the take. Well, you're going to get their vote, right? And then so when you're elected, you're going to march more and more towards socialism. And then when the right gets in, they're going to peel back a few things. But don't forget, on the so-called right, there's all kinds of socialism going on too, like handouts to corporations and stuff like that. So they'll peel back some of it, but they won't peel back as much as was already on. In fact, they'll even add on more. So it'll be like 2 steps forward and 1 step back, or 2 steps forward and a half step back, or whatever. But it's never completely back. This is why when Trump gets in, people thought, oh, Obama racked up $10 trillion in debt. And, Trump's on track to do the same damn thing. And he's supposedly on the right. So no, it seems like an impossible task. This may sound like a black-pilled kind of a video, but I hope to look at it as sort of realistically. I don't know if it's possible. I could be completely wrong. Maybe there are cases in history where people have finally figured it out just through reason and evidence. I don't know of any. If you do know of any, let me know. It would be interesting to study. But there is certainly a strong power in pain. I think it's stronger than desire, actually, because that's what the two sides of motivation, right, are, well, pain and pleasure. Well, pain trumps pleasure every time because people will fight for their own survival. And that's probably what's going to happen in time. And, it could be, it's a shame, really, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's just the way we learn in a real visceral sense is through a bit of pain. So let's see how it goes. Steve here again, great chatting. Oh, the lesson here. The lesson here is just observing self-knowledge, right? Learning that for us to have our quality of life, it's better that we be moral, but that we have reason and evidence, and that we have morality, because that's the higher human. Otherwise, we're animals, basically, intelligent animals, if we're going around stealing other people's stuff and marching towards socialism, because socialism is a I would say is devolutionary. It's not evolutionary in the long run. I mean, yeah, 2 steps forward and 1 step back within the paradigm of the growth of evolution. But then there's a reset, right? There's a reset when pain comes, and then there's evolution again. And evolution seems to, so far in the history of humanity, in the history of the universe, has won out because it's continuing to expand. The universe itself is continuing to expand. Innovation is continuing to expand. All these things are continuing to expand. And yes, there's loss along the way, but the net, I think, is evolutionary. And pain plays a big part in it because it's what motivates us to grow. That's what I've talked about before in the continuum of advancement. I used to think it started with desire. Now what I see is that it starts with pain. And it's not that we have to seek it out. We find enough of it just living in life. Steve here again, great chatting. If you like what I'm doing, please like, subscribe, and share, and we'll talk again soon. Bye for now.